Have you ever felt kind of stuck in your love life? Making the same mistakes, feeling the same frustrations, almost like you're following a script you didn't even write. Well, it turns out a lot of us are. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the hidden patterns that shape our romantic relationships. And you might be surprised to find out they often start way, way before we ever go on our first date. It's the big question, isn't it? Why do you keep attracting the same type of person or getting into the same arguments over and over again? The answer, a lot of the time, is buried in our childhood. And understanding that is the absolute first step to breaking the cycle. Okay, let's get into it. So, this whole idea comes from two marriage and family counselors, Doctors Milan and K. Jükovich. They call it our love style. Now, this isn't some kind of unchangeable destiny. Think of it more like a set of behavioral patterns we learned as kids just to get by and make sense of the world. These patterns become our default settings in our adult relationships, for better or for worse. So let's break down the 5 styles. We're going to start with 2 styles that often pop up from really difficult or chaotic homes, the pleaser and the victim. Both of these are basically survival strategies, but they show up in very, very different ways. First up, the pleaser. Just imagine a childhood where you were always walking on eggshells around a parent who was super critical or angry or maybe even really anxious. What do you do to cope? Well, you learn to be the good kid. Your job wasn't to get comfort. Your job was to give it, to keep the peace by figuring out what your parent needed before they even knew. And you can probably guess how this plays out in adulthood, right? Pleasers become experts at reading other people's moods. They absolutely hate conflict, so they'll just give in to avoid it. Saying no feels almost physically impossible. But here's the catch. When they get overwhelmed or feel like they're failing at keeping everyone happy, they can just poof, shut down, and run from the relationship completely. So for a pleaser, the way to build healthier relationships isn't about trying to please people better. It's actually about learning to be honest about your own feelings and your own needs, even when it feels super uncomfortable. Okay, next up is the victim. This love style is forged in a home that's deeply chaotic, maybe even violent. For these kids, the main survival skill wasn't to please, it was to disappear. They learned to be quiet, to be compliant, to stay right under the radar to avoid any trouble. A lot of them create these incredibly rich, imaginary worlds just to mentally escape all that stress. Now, as adults, victims often carry that childhood with them, in the form of low self-esteem, anxiety, you name it. And here's the paradox. Because they're so used to chaos, a calm, stable relationship can actually feel really weird and unsettling. So they just adapt by going with the flow. And sadly, they can end up in relationships with controlling partners, basically recreating that dynamic they grew up in. For the victim, the journey forward is all about building self-worth from the ground up. It's about learning that your voice matters and finding the strength to stand up for yourself. Finally, breaking that lifelong pattern of just going along with things. So let's just put these two side by side for a second. The key difference really comes down to their approach. Both styles come from tough childhoods, but the pleaser takes an active role. They try to manage the problem. The victim takes a passive role. They try to become invisible to it. All right, while the pleaser and the victim adapt to chaos, our next style tries to get rid of it completely. This is the controller. And this love style is born from a childhood where there just wasn't enough safety and protection. The controller didn't have anyone they could really rely on to protect them, so they learned to do it all themselves. They built up these huge walls and toughened up so they would never, ever have to feel helpless or vulnerable again. Their whole mission became about maintaining control so they could feel safe. So as an adult, that need to be in charge is, well, it's everything. Controllers don't see anger as a moment of weakness. They see it as a tool to stay in power. They're often really rigid, they hate stepping out of their comfort zone, and they absolutely insist on solving problems their way, and usually alone. You can see the challenge here, right? For the controller, it's about learning to do the one thing that feels the most dangerous, letting go. It's about building trust in other people and learning to manage their anger. That's the key for them to form stable, healthy relationships. Okay, our final 2 styles, the vacillator and the avoider. These are often the product of parents who are emotionally inconsistent or maybe just a bit distant. Let's see how that plays out. The vacillator's childhood was an emotional roller coaster. Their parent was just unpredictable. One minute, they're warm and loving. The next, they're distant or unavailable. This kind of inconsistency creates this deep, deep fear of abandonment and a constant hunger for the love they never got consistently.
So as an adult, the Vacillator is basically on a lifelong quest for that perfect, consistent love. They tend to jump into new relationships with this intense idealization, putting their new partner way up on a pedestal. But because of that, they get disappointed really easily when reality doesn't live up to the fantasy. And get this, they are hyperperceptive. They can feel the tiniest shift when their partner starts to pull away.
So for the Vacillator, the key is to just slow down. Their path forward is all about learning to manage those intense initial feelings and actually taking the time to get to know someone before diving in headfirst. And finally, the avoider. The avoider's childhood wasn't necessarily chaotic like some of the others, but it probably lacked a lot of open affection. The family motto was basically, be independent, be self-reliant. Emotions weren't really a big topic of conversation, so the child just learned to push down their own needs and feelings and just get on with it. In their adult relationships, avoiders prize their independence above almost everything. They rely on logic way more than messy emotions, and they need a lot of personal space. So when a partner gets really emotional, it makes the avoider super uncomfortable, and their first instinct is to pull away and create distance. For the avoider, growth means learning a whole new language, the language of emotion. The path forward involves taking a risk to open up, to connect with what they're actually feeling, and then share that honestly with a partner. That's how they can build the intimacy they were never really taught how to have. So we just walked through 5 really distinct patterns, and each one has its own logic, its own story, and its own set of challenges. Just understanding your style, that's the first, most powerful step. But the real question is, what do you do with that information? Let's recap the path forward. Here it is, all in one place. For pleasers, it's about being authentic. For victims, it's building self-worth. For controllers, it's learning to trust. For vacillators, it's about patience. And for avoiders, it's about emotional expression. See, each path is different, but they all lead toward healthier, more fulfilling connections. And this is why it all matters. Recognizing the pattern is how you finally start to rewrite your own script. And that brings us to the final and maybe the most important question. As you were listening to all of this, which style really resonated with you? Recognizing a piece of yourself in one of these patterns isn't a bad thing. It's not a judgment. It's an incredible opportunity for growth. So, what are you going to do with that insight?